This first workshop tonight, Emergent Trends and Employee Needs Series, I just think is so crucially important. I mean, we look at our school as a school to serve adults and workers of the city, to provide new opportunities for career advancement. And I'm not going to introduce the panelists. I'm going to thank them jointly. I'm going to let Jennifer do that, but I will introduce Jennifer Rubain, who is the University Dean for Recruitment and Diversity at all of Cuny. She has, I guess, been with us since 2010, and prior to that was at Brooklyn College in a somewhat similar capacity for 10 years. She's a tireless advocate for all kinds of things in this university, and also keeps us honorable and honest, I think, in lots of ways. So again, for our alum particularly, thank you so much for coming back and for spending time with us. And I will now get out of the way and turn this over to Jennifer to introduce our panelists. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and you have the bio, so you know what an accomplished panel we have today. And I'm so pleased to be a part of this event. So first, let me welcome everyone who's joining us here today in person, and also let's welcome the folks who are joining us via simulcast. We appreciate that they're taking the time out of their schedule to participate or to listen into what will prove to be a very engaging conversation today. So I'm going to start by briefly introducing all of the panelists, and then I'm going to get out of the way and allow them to talk about themselves and their role. So on my far right, we have Cindy Pace, who's the Assistant Vice President for Global Diversity and Inclusion for MetLife. Next, we have Anna Duarte McCarthy, Managing Director and Chief Diversity Officer at Citi. And finally, we have Michele Green, and she's wearing green today, so you remember that name. Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer of Prudential. So we'll start with Cindy, and she'll give her remarks.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. And I just, on behalf of the over 65,000 employees that we have at MetLife in over 40 countries, I bring you greetings this evening into our online community. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to you being also active at this time. Well, I guess I will start off just talking a little bit about why is diversity important. The business case for diversity has been made over and over again. We have so much research that shows how diversity is great for performance on teams. Diversity in terms of business is very good for the bottom line, increasing sales and revenue. But I think the thing that we are really focused on at MetLife in terms of diversity is making sure that we have two things. We look at diversity from a talent perspective, having the best talent, people who have diverse experiences and perspectives that they can bring to the company. So we really value the unique attributes that each person can bring. And secondly, commercial opportunities. We want MetLife to be a customer. We want people to see us as a client. We have clients and customers that we're working with, and that we're the number one choice for them. And in order to do that, we want to make sure that we reflect what the communities look like. The communities where we work and live every single day, we want to make sure that we have those employees internally and that we are connecting with the needs of our customer base. To do that, you need diversity. But diversity without inclusion does not work. And so what is this inclusion piece? Some people ask me that. And basically the inclusion piece is really, do we value what you bring to the table? Do we listen to you when you have something to say? Do we appreciate your uniqueness and your differences? And in order to be successful in having a diverse workforce, we have to be inclusive. And this is well beyond tolerance. Like, we're in the appreciating area where we really appreciate what you bring to the table. So at MetLife, we've been on this journey for about, I would say, 14 years. In 2000, the first Office of Diversity started. And this happens, diversity can happen in cycles. It depends the company. But we had some changes in the organization. Well, I would say the biggest change happened in 2010 when almost overnight with an acquisition of Alico, MetLife became a global organization. So now this 145-year-old company who has been, a rock in the community in North America for a number and over 100 years is now global. And that doesn't mean that everyone knows who MetLife is. So there are places where we might go where people, we have to let them know, what are we about? Why are we important? And that also means a change in the type of employees that we want to attract. We want people that have cultural fluency, that are able to work with people from all types of backgrounds. And so that has really been a shift for our organization, over the last 4 years as we become more global.
Thank you. Anna?
Certainly. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here this evening as well, and I'll share with you in the time a little bit about myself and something about the company that I work for. So about myself, I'm the daughter of Dominican Americans. I don't know if there's anyone here from the Dominican Republic. Representante, okay. So that being said, my parents came here like many other, of our citizens to find more work. And my dad was actually a medical resident, but there were no openings at the time. He came here, the only residency was available was in psychiatry. So he still says today he would have been a fabulous surgeon. But by the age of 4, I think I knew what obsessive compulsive was. So that's being growing up in a psychiatric household. But that being said, one of the things that informs the work I do is that very often we were the only Dominican family in the communities we lived in, which meant people didn't look like us, they didn't have the accents my parents had, didn't listen to the same music, and sometimes that wasn't favorably received. And when we moved, for example, into one neighborhood, someone threw eggs at our house. And I remember being a child and asking my mom, why did someone do that? And she said, that wasn't done deliberately. Like, she tried to hide it from us, but And so as I grew up, and I grew up in the 60s and 70s, there were so many different issues happening around inclusion and around equality. And so that continued to be a thread in my life. I ended up going to graduate school and majoring in multicultural counseling. Worked in a community college for 2 years, then worked in a university at the New School, and then started to really focus on policy and practice and made the transition from the public sector to the private sector gosh, I think about that because I'm getting so much older, but in the 80s, so in 1994 actually. So that being said, I have a long passion around this space, and I want people to be able to be themselves at work, to thrive, and not to feel that there's any type of obstacle that is either institutional, and for some individuals, our own mindsets that are holding people back. Now, the work I've done in Citi very much, parallels. We think about Citi, it's equivalent to Cuny. We have 250,000 employees around the world. We operate in 100 countries. And if you think about Citi, it's sort of Wall Street and Main Street. So there's the Wall Street side, it's the institutional clients. So think about Fortune 500 firms like an IBM, for example, or an Eli Lilly. We are their banker. We provide funding for their investments. We help transact their capital around the world. And then we think about you and I, whether it's a credit card that you hold, or you might have gone to Citi for a loan, whether it's for household goods or for a home. That's the Main Street side of the house. And not surprisingly, as you followed the news the last few years, our business has been under high scrutiny. A lot of regulatory focus there, which has shifted a bit of the model that we work within. And then, if we think about threes, clearly there's the talent opportunity. Are we getting the best talent, and are we recognizing that that talent comes from across universities, from backgrounds, from cultures, that there's no imposed construct that says we will not recruit from this particular place, and that we also are being relevant to our clients and recognizing that around the world those clients have very different cultures, there are very different orientations, and that's part of our business strategy. And then increasingly, there is, those of you, this program actually is very familiar with some of the regulatory aspects, whether you're in labor studies or focus around people with disability. You understand and know that in some countries, the US being among them, there is a focus for companies like Citi and other federal contractors around equal affirmative action, around different employee groups. That's increasingly becoming a theme around the world. So there is a regulatory aspect, and then there's also a shareholder aspect, where the individuals who've invested in our company want to see with transparency, what is Citi doing around inclusion, around employment, and around equal promotion and visibility around that. So the work that I've done has really moved from being much more vertical around women, racial and ethnic diversity, to a much broader focus. And it's unique around the world. And as you know, many of you coming from different countries, that local culture will influence what people are focusing upon. So it's an area that's grown. It's one that I would hope at some point we wouldn't need anymore, but it continues to be important as part of our corporate strategy.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Michelle?
Good evening. Thank you, everybody, for having me, and I'm really happy to be here with Anna and Cindy tonight, my colleagues. Really good to see them and catch up. It's funny because as I listen to both of them, so much of what you guys said resonates with me and sounds so similar. I love to do these types of conversations because it makes me realize that, our company, my role, the work that I do is not far off the mark from that everyone else is doing out there. I work for Prudential. I've been with Prudential for 4 years. I actually come to this work, believe it or not, with an employment law background. I worked as an employment lawyer for many years and managed discrimination cases. And it was through that work that at one point I woke up one day and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like, I'm fighting and litigating situations where there may not necessarily have been discrimination per se, but situations where people are not getting along because they can't appreciate the difference one another brings to the table. And I slowly transitioned out of the practice of law into roles where I could be more proactive and work inside of a company or a government agency to help them drive diversity and inclusion. And to Cindy's point, inclusion where people are appreciating each other, working together, and breaking down barriers. So that we didn't have the type of litigation I was dealing with on the front end of my career. So I left the practice of law after about 10 years and moved into state government. And I worked for 2 governors in New Jersey and really tried to help them drive the D&I agenda around diversity and inclusion, and also managed EEO compliance issues. And it was through that work that I was fortunate enough to land some great opportunities in corporate America, both at Merrill Lynch and now at Prudential. So it's been really neat to see my career come to an evolution and to be able to do the work that Anna describes that's so important and critical to our employees and to our communities. So to that end, I took my job as Chief Diversity Officer through 2 years ago, literally just under 2 years ago. It's been about 20 months. And when I took the job, I was basically told that Prudential had had a D&I strategy that had been in place, and they had just refreshed it. And I was fortunate enough to literally be handed a brand new strategy. And what was different about the strategy than the past strategy was the initial strategy was really focused internally on the people and the talent at the company, which is the right place to be. But the new strategy was expanded to actually have a specific focus on market and community. So I didn't bring it with me, but I have a really cool 3-pillar page slide which shows people, market, and community. So when at Prudential we talk about D&I, we're speaking about it with each 3 buckets. And by the way, I didn't say this because it sounds so similar to our companies, but we are also a large company. We're global, in 40 countries, 50,000 employees. So I hear you both around the global issues that come with D&I. And our strategy was written very broadly so that it could be flexed country by country. We tried really hard not to give such strict requirements under the strategy that one country would look at it and say, this won't work for us. We tried to make sure it wasn't too US-centric. So it's been really fun over the 2 years to help the business leaders and the corporate area leaders take the strategy and make it work for them. Just to give you a little bit about each pillar. The people pillar really speaks to talent. It speaks to exactly what Cindy touched on. It's having the best diverse talent at the table, getting them engaged, developing people, promoting people, and giving everyone an opportunity to bring their full authentic selves to the workplace. And in the market pillar, that really speaks to our efforts to tap into a broader customer base. I mean, Prudential started as an insurance company. We sell life insurance. And over the years, we've evolved into a company where we also offer financial product services to individuals, to companies, to businesses, et cetera. So we're trying to make sure that we're selling our products and services not just to the typical customer that we sold to for the last 130 years, but to a broader customer base. So in the market pillar, we've been educating our salespeople, our sales professionals about different communities and the specific needs in those communities, and we've been trying to market in those communities in a more thoughtful way. Something as simple as a commercial, and who that commercial is, how that commercial resonates. We had an advertising department 2 years ago that put out an ad that was targeted to the Hispanic Latino community, and I got calls about that ad the next day. So we had to have a conversation with advertising and say, okay, let's think about how are you talking to the community? How are you making sure you're getting messages that resonate? So that's kind of a little piece of the market pillar. And in the community pillar, it's many things. It's obviously philanthropic efforts. What are you doing in the communities where your company works and serves? How are you supporting diverse small business owners and helping them grow and develop? And are you giving them business? So supplier diversity is a really big deal for us. And making sure that, for example, in Newark, which is our corporate headquarters, we are so entrenched in the community. When our new mayor got elected, he called our office and said, help me interview my direct reports. I mean, who does that, right? Where does that happen? So that, to me, was a great example of how we're so connected to our community and our city of Newark that the new mayor knew, let's call Prudential and have them help us staff up our new office. So it's great work that we're doing. We're having a good run. Emerging trends for us really are around our global space and how we help drive D&I in different countries where certain things that are legal here are not legal there. How we address the compliance issues, and to Anna's point, with all the different regulatory bodies of work that touch country by country, helping with that. And the other emerging trend for us is managing the new regs. We're a SIFI. We have a federal designation that requires us to adhere to certain regulatory requirements, which are very strict. So dealing with that, and also really driving more around D&I with respect to veterans and people with disabilities. So that's some of our focus point right now.
Okay, thank you. The wonderful thing about this panel is that we can learn more about diversity and inclusion, but we can also learn from these seasoned executives about their career. And I know being at SPS, you'd like to hear information about careers. So I'm going to start with diversity, but I have a mixture of questions. So a lot of companies talk about managing or leveraging diversity, but as practitioners, how do you measure success? How do you know you're doing well?
Personally or as a
company?
On D&I?
Mm-hmm.
We have what we call our key performance indicators. So, and I've been at Citi nearly 20 years now, so I've had an opportunity to see the evolution of that. So if we think about what's in ours, we have a CEO, and there's a CEO scorecard that is held for the top of the house senior management. And within that, we include criteria that are specific to diversity, including the extent to which we interview and include diversity in our candidate slates, the percentage of high performers who are male and female, and we also have a employee perception index, which measures employees' favorability, and we have a couple of items that are very specific to diversity, which we measure year over year. And what's interesting, so those are, and then we have a lot of analytics we run around demographics, because that's something that in some countries we're able to track demographics. To Michelle's point, we are now looking at metrics which are newly required for federal contractors. And the interesting thing is, so you have all of these metrics, but the percentage of, for example, women globally has really inched very slowly. And to some extent, you could say that it's flatlined in our industry. If you look at the number of women who are coming in as analysts or associates, like MBAs or undergrads, but you don't see that representation moving up into the C-suite. And that research conducted by organizations like Panelist, among others, show that there is a real paucity of talent, female talent at the top of the house. So while we can track metrics and we do have accountability, we gave ourselves, if you look in the mirror, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think where I've seen progress is when its CEO has owned it. He owns it now. We happen to have a gentleman CEO. He owns that metric, and our board of directors are also a body that we report to on diversity progress. So, I know that some of you are in the space around labor and perhaps may consider roles like ours in diversity and inclusion. Metrics matter. There's a lot of heart in what we do and passion, but you need to measure and show, here's what we're working on, here's how we plan to measure it, here is whether we're up or down, flat, but at least the numbers are, in our environment, really critical. So I think progress can be both, progress around demographics. Are we keeping the talent in? Do we have mobility? Are people being promoted? Is it diverse at all levels? And then we also do measure perception, because to your point earlier, inclusion, are people there, but are they feeling fully optimized, engaged, favorable about the environment? And this year, I'll stop on this point, we've been including this diversity index in our opinion survey for the last 10 years. And we decided this year to change the questions we're asking, because we reached an all-time high. So 80% favorability is very high. We said, well, we may be asking the wrong questions. Maybe people really don't like this place, but they just keep answering, yes, I'm committed. So we need to, so we said, we're going to refresh. We'll applaud that we reached this favorability, but we need to ask different questions. So we're actually going to be more specific around asking people if they consider they are treated with equality and fairness, versus just saying, I feel respected and valued. So we're going to put the words quality into the question, which we think will be helpful to us. So those are just some of the things we look at. We measure a lot of things, but we've picked out a couple of things that are really owned by the top of the house.
And if I can just add to that, to Anna's point, we do something very similar. It's really funny that I just love this because I realize I'm on the mark here. We set objectives each year. We tweak them and adjust them, every year. But basically, against those three pillars, there are core objectives, and each of the business leaders are tasked with managing to those objectives. And much like at Citi, we report to the board, we report to the chairman and his direct reports routinely throughout the year to let them know what's going on with respect to those objectives. And one of the responsibilities of my team is to stay very close to the businesses, work very closely with them in driving this work, and then we actually do mid-year and year-end kind of reviews with the business leaders around their efforts against each and every one of those objectives. And at the mid-year and year-end point, my role is to go and sit down with the chairman and CEO and say, okay, John, here's where we are. He asks me questions like, who is role modeling, which leaders are role models, which leaders need improvement, which business is doing great, what are they doing well, what's working, what's not, against each objective. And you know what? It's tied to their performance rating and pay at the end of the year. So I totally agree on that. I mean, what gets measured matters, and we make sure that we do that very thoughtfully and strategically.
Cindy?
I just echo exactly what Michelle and Anna have already shared about the importance of metrics and the fact that we do look at metrics carefully. We actually have a workforce analytics team. These are experts at really being able to look at the numbers, interpret the numbers, and then we come in as a diversity team and say, okay, what are the recommendations we want to make? I want to highlight something also that Anna said. One thing that we realized recently is, are we asking the right questions? Because there are vital signs that you can have around your business. Looking at hires, promotions, voluntary and involuntary turnover and all of that. That's going to only tell you so much. What you really want to also know is what is happening qualitatively. Is there anything that is getting in the way of, for example, women progressing in the organization? Is there something culturally that's happening that we are not aware of? So even though we have a wonderful organizational survey that we've been doing, it's organizational health, which actually McKinsey works with MetLife on this particular survey, and we launched it last year. We got really great information. What we realized is we want to learn more about what's going on with women. So we are partnering with Sylvia Ann Hewitt, her consulting firm, and we're going to do a cultural diagnostic. The phase 1 is really on women. And we're looking at several levels of women in the organization. So we're looking at that layer you're talking about, that we call it, I actually got this from Sylvia, the marzipan layer, this rich layer of talent that is hidden inside the tiramisu. And we want to know what's going on there. And so we want to ask those questions. And with partnering with Sylvia and her organization, we're able to do this anonymously. So this is not something where, we're tracking, the survey that you're getting. People will be able to do this in an online fashion and share with us what they're really thinking. To your point, and what are the questions that we need to ask? And we will be able to do that in the moment. So I'm very excited about that, because we think from this feedback, it will help us strengthen the strategy. Because we've had a really great strategy around women, and that's actually what I lead in my work. I oversee the Global Women's Initiative, which is really focused on strengthening the pipeline, as well as increasing the number of women in broader leadership roles. To do my job, I can't just go from the gut, even though sometimes I think I want to. I actually have to look at what is the data telling me, and then I have to also qualitatively find out what's going on. So I would not be able to do it without doing this cultural diagnostic.
So Cindy, it's nice that you mentioned Sylvia Hewitt, because my next question is about her book. So Sylvia Hewitt wrote a book entitled Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor, The New Way to Fast Track Your Career. And I'd like to hear from each of you. What do you think about that advice? I'll start with Michelle and we'll go down the line.
So I don't know about forget a mentor. I say have a mentor and a sponsor. I've always been a personal fan of a board of mentors. All throughout my career, I've had a board of mentors. They may not have necessarily known they were on my board. Many of them thought they were the mentor, but they didn't know they were sharing space with others. But I've had a board of mentors all along. But one of the things that I realized maybe a couple of years ago is that all along the way I've had sponsors and I didn't even know it. The mentors helped me figure out what I wanted to do next. They helped me career plan. They helped me manage work life. They helped me make all kinds of decisions. But my sponsors were the ones who made calls for me when I didn't know they were making calls. My sponsor, when I was deciding to leave the practice of law, and he knew I wanted to leave the practice of law, he made some phone calls that prompted the call to the governor's office that I didn't even know was coming. So I have to say that personally, I think that both are important, both are key, and I think both are ultimately critical to your success professionally. And I encourage everyone, a board of mentors, look out for those sponsors and make sure you tap into them.
I think that's wise. And something else is that one of the points of the research are that women and individuals who are different than the majority group are under-sponsored. And that's the research created an opportunity to have that conversation in the workplace, that historically, when you have a majority group, they tend to look and create relationships with people who remind them of themselves. So they'll see this young protege, they'll take an interest in his career, and continually talk about that person, advocate for them when they're not in the room. And that is more generally found in the study that she conducted along with, across a number of industries with, in the U.S., white males versus females. And then it was found to be true for other groups that were less represented. So, the takeaway for us at Citi has been, can we create that in a formal way? So we created a sponsorship program. It was sort of successful. And what didn't work well, and what we sort of changed the next time around, is that you have to earn sponsorship. You can't knock on someone's door and say, will you be my sponsor? Because generally the person, if they don't know you well, they don't know if they need to invest in you. So if one of the things I talk to your colleagues who are coming in is that you have to perform. And football is starting tonight. We were discussing this. So you have to perform, right? And you have to perform, and people take an interest in you, and people invest in you. And because of that, that helps get that notoriety, that reputation, and you have to perform consistently well. I do believe, like Michele said, you have to build those relationships. And one of the things I find, I know for myself when I was a younger working mom, that I would hustle home. I wasn't doing things to certainly potentially build that social capital because I wanted to get home. I wanted to see my daughter. And so we encourage people to find ways. You don't have to go out at night and whatever people do. I mean, some people work 2 jobs, so you can't going home to manage a house is another job. So, but to try to be strategic. Someone said yesterday, that was really interesting. She does a quarterly, she has just on her box, I'm going to reach out to 3 people once a quarter, people who I've worked with, people who I had good relationships with. They're not officially her sponsors, but she's building that relationship. So I think it's something that's important to do. No one told me to do that when I was coming into the workforce. And I had a couple of people who took an interest in my career, and then I found myself later without any sponsorship because half the Citigroup had left. That was after the market dislocation, so we found a very different management team in place. But that can happen anywhere. So that's important. I love what Michele said. You want that to be broad. You don't pin yourself to one person necessarily, because when that person leaves, you don't have that sounding board or that cover. So I like that advice Michele gave. I think it's critical, and I think a lot of people don't put energy into that. And more so now, people are just saying, will you be my mentor? Will you be my sponsor? You have to earn that a bit. So performance matters. But don't be afraid to make, if someone calls and says, gee, I love that presentation you made, at the Women's Council meeting. I'd love to hear more about that subject. That's a really easy meeting to have versus the person says, will you be my mentor? Now, I don't know if I can meet that expectation, but I can certainly talk about something that we talked about and so forth. So those are other ways to get in the door with people you admire, to find something about them, read their bio, find some way to connect with them that makes it easy for both of you, and then see what comes from that.
Cindy?
To add to the conversation, which has been great, about mentorship and sponsorship, something that we learned earlier this year, MetLife has a global women's leadership forum where we bring the top women in the company. These are the senior most women in the company who really do have social and political capital. They are influential and they can really help us in moving the needle with the emerging female talent in the organization. So we brought them together and we had someone come, her name is Susan Colantuno, and talked about the missing 33%. So she came up with this particular research number. But in essence, what she shared with us that we already knew, because Catalyst has done this research, that women are over-mentored. So I think the reason why Sylvia kind of started with the forget, and it's really, she doesn't mean like forget, but don't over-focus on the mentoring and forget about the sponsorship. Women are overly mentored in a certain way, and Susan Colantuno uses the term cake mentoring, which basically means women get this psychosocial, emotional support, let's cry together, let me help pick you up, tell me all about what's going on. That's a very different relationship with the sponsor. With the sponsor, it's the good, the good, the good. You're not in there crying, you're really talking about the business. And so what we found out is We don't need to forget about mentoring, but one of the things that we're doing with these senior women who we call Global Women's Initiative Ambassadors is we're doing something called strategic mentoring. And that's each of these senior women are pledging to mentor junior women around strategic business and financial acumen. Why does MetLife, why are we in the business we're in? What really matters? What are our strategic goals over the next 5 years? How does your role fit into where we're going as an organization? And really strengthen women in that area. Now, this is not to say that we will not continue to mentor women on the soft skills and, you know, having presence and having great communication skills. But we don't want to not talk about business and only talk about your outfit or how you present it, because that's the feedback that women sometimes get. And unfortunately, we walk a fine line in terms of how we can come across. The other thing that we notice is, it's interesting, our treasurer was sharing this with me. She was at a soccer game, I think, with her family, and she noticed how the coach was talking to the team. And she said, you know, one thing I noticed is these kids are getting in-the-moment feedback. If you didn't run the ball or whatever you're supposed to do, I'm not a soccer mom, so please, I don't know the terms. You know immediately what you didn't do, and the coach tells you and sends you back in. Sometimes we don't get that at work, and so one thing that we can also do, and we've been encouraging women as, you know, we talk about mentorship and sponsorship, is to seek feedback. And be in the mindset where you can receive it. So when you seek the feedback, you may not agree with what is being said, but it is a gift because this person is giving you information that you might not have previously had. And so all of these things become very important as we're looking for people to go to the next level, to have those mentors that help them developmentally, and then to have those sponsors that are able to help move this talent through the organization because they have the power to do it. And in Anna's point, these are people that have performed. So if you're not performing, I always say to people, make sure that you perform and you find out what is success for that person you're working with. Because there's one thing with working hard, you know, and kind of having your head down and thinking that you're doing what you're supposed to do, but then there's also the metric of success that that manager or that boss is saying, this was the goal this year, and even though you ran this program over here, that wasn't the goal. So these are the kinds of things that we want to talk about when we're mentoring and sponsoring.
So each of you have talked about women's progress. And one of the things, you know, I've attended the Women's Leadership Conference, and they had a very interesting conversation about how to engage men in this discussion.
Absolutely.
So I'll throw that out to you to talk about what your companies are doing to engage men, because that's really critical.
I will just say, believe it or not, our men are so engaged, they're like knocking down the door engaged.
Okay.
It's actually really interesting to watch. And I think it actually has to do not just with, you know, issues around women, but just the strategy that we launched a couple of years ago. We really did make it focused on leadership buy-in and mindset changing for the leaders. Really helping leaders understand that we needed them to get it and embrace it before we can move forward. And what I found is some of our senior most leaders who are men, they come and they ask the questions. They ask how they can help. They show up at our affinity group events. They volunteer. They participate. They mentor. I had something very interesting happen to me personally. There's a very, very senior leader at our company who I think is my sponsor as we speak. And I've watched him take me under his wing, and it took me a minute, and not to mentor me, but to guide me to my next step. And to call me in and say, this is where you're going next, this is what we want you to do. And I said, how did this happen? And he actually told me, he said, you know what? He goes, we are committed to making sure that we not only bring in diverse talent, but that we help you succeed and that we make sure we're pointing folks in the right direction. So our leaders are engaged at every level. They're volunteering, we're not having to ask. They're offering up their time, their services, their money when we want to do programming and things like that, and they're showing up in a really large, very, very authentic way. So we haven't necessarily had to structure any type of, men ally program, because they're actually showing up in such an authentic way. It's happening very organically.
So slightly different in that I would say we see more of a generation play and a level play. So certainly the CEO grew up in Citi. He's been at Citi more than 30 years. Some of the women he started out with, he has been a sponsor to. So he has more of the focus on, he wants to change the story of Wall Street. He wants to make it a more inclusive place. So he holds his leadership team accountable. Each one of them is aligned to a formal strategy. So we have someone who's aligned to our employee network, someone who focuses on our LGBT community, someone on women, and even within women, there's more segmentation, branding, sponsorship, community. I have to tell you though, there's that middle layer that just wants to fill jobs quickly, and it's not necessarily an intentional bias, but there is an indifference, which can be very dangerous. And so we have continually offered training as we grow our affinity groups or employee networks around the country and now around the world. We always ensure there's a business leader for a women's network, for example, that is aligned and at the top of that particular geography, who shows this is a business imperative. And that's really critical because, years ago, there was a woman I worked with a long time ago when I worked in education. She was one of the individuals who sued Sambo's restaurant, and so Chris Johnson. And she said, growing up in the South, there was the devil you knew, but when you come up to the North, you don't see the devil. And I've never forgotten that. She was someone I worked with, 25, 30 years ago. And I think that's part of the challenge with this space, is that people can line up and say, oh, I'll come to the women's event, but then they don't have any women on their team. So we have work to do. It's culturally much better, and you see nice engagement. Certainly our CEO is fabulous. But there's a lot of people in the middle, and so the middle, is an area of focus. The other thing that clearly engages people, though, is that we're a for-profit business, and we have two senior executives who lead our global women's strategy, and when they put the numbers together of all the impact we're now having with clients, the eyes light up. Oh my goodness! One of my colleagues said, these guys have never wanted to do anything around women, but when they saw that we were doing something at the Guggenheim, they came running after me. I want my clients at this women's event. So suddenly it's helpful because it helps them make money. So there is, that's sort of a gross generalization, but when they see the clear dollar opportunity, suddenly it becomes, okay, this is both inclusion, but there's also business here. So that piece is critical, because a lot of this work has often been about equality and the right thing to do. And to Cindy's point earlier, there is a business marketplace opportunity that is very important to also bring into that conversation. And dollars left at the table, like someone, I'll just quickly share this, was telling me that the bank was going to do a pitch. And before they went, and this is not an uncommon story, they called Citi and said, don't show up with a bunch of white males, because the last two banks that came here did, and we're not going to do business with them. So, and the good news was that team happened to be actually mostly women, which is very unusual. But there is a client and business opportunity too. So we have work to do. Nice, I've been there long enough to see the shift, to see change. But there are a lot of people who, again, they're not intentionally biased, just indifferent, and don't have to engage. And frankly, I think that could be just as dangerous.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree with both points that have been made. I would say in MetLife's journey, we're early in the journey for this phase, because I'm sure there have been some changes over the years. One thing that we did do this year as part of the Global Women's Leadership Forum, which I was telling you about, the senior women that have the 2.5-day meeting here where we bring in different speakers and they have an opportunity to learn about what's happening in women in leadership from a research and thought leader perspective. What we did this year was we brought in Sylvia Ann Hewlett to talk about sponsorship, and we asked each Global Women's Ambassador to invite a male who had some impact on their career, a positive impact, whether it was a colleague who supported them in their work, or it was a former manager who had promoted them. And we had over 40 men attend this event. Now, it's like 67 women that are involved. But I thought that was really good. And we had the event at the UN, and Sylvia talked about the importance of sponsorship. Along with that, she also talked about diversity research. And what I found out that evening was there were men that came to me and said they did not know some of the research. And I said, wow, this is really good, because we can start with education. Educating, why is this important? Why do we even have a Global Women's Initiative? Well, I'll tell you why. Women are the largest emerging market next to China and India. That's why, and we're a global organization. And we also know that in terms of financial services, women are more than 50% of the workforce. And if we don't make sure that we are, moving women through that pipeline into executive leadership, we could actually be impacted from a business perspective. We may not make our numbers because we are not attracting, the customers that we would like, because they're seeing us as someone who's not culturally savvy. So when we talk about it like that, the men are very excited, and we are going to be part of some research that the Center for Talent Innovation is doing on power of the purse, which is basically the power of the purse for women. Women in terms of wealth accumulators is increasing globally, and I think in a number of years it's going to be close to 1 billion women in the workplace. So that's money, right? And so, to Anna's point, it's some kind of way when you tie this back to business, and it's less about this is a nice thing to do, or you should do this. It is about justice. I mean, don't get me wrong. We want people to be treated fairly. We want everyone to have an opportunity to have a career. It is also about this is great for business. So in terms of engaging men, we found that we have to do a little bit more education. And part of that education is just not on the business, but it's what are the biases that we might hold and not even be aware come into play when we're hiring. And so as Anna said, the Me Too syndrome, I might be unconscious that I've hired 25 men back to back. And I had female candidates, but maybe I have some type of bias that I'm unaware of. So we've talked about that, and there's also an education piece that we're going to be moving into for men to understand, from a female perspective, for men to understand some of the things that they may not really have the language for. And I'll give you an example. I was just at a meeting where one of the thought leaders, and this was at Simmons College, talked about overuse of the word or the term lack of confidence, that women lack confidence. And her example was, I think we need more verbiage around it. Is it lack of confidence, or is it that women are careful? And when an opportunity is presented to us, we have a lot going on. How does this, impact my family? And it could be my kids, my parents, my sister, my, nephew. We're going through all of that. Or if I move, how does that impact, my position on the board, and what can I do? And we're bringing all of this is going on in our mind as we're being offered a job. So for a male, it could be perceived as she doesn't want that. Well, what we might be doing is just calculating. So what we want to do is a little bit more gender intelligence, so we can learn, and it's male and female. So I know I gave a female example, but it's also that we want to learn more about perception. We want women to learn more about perception. So we're going to be doing more of that work. A woman by the name of Barbara Annis has been an expert in this area and has done some work around, gender gender intelligence. This is more than men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So we're
On
expanding.
that note, there's a lot going on, which is so exciting. But I know the audience must have questions, so let's turn it over to the audience. Who wants to step up and ask a question? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Maria. I have, first of all, I want to say thank you for being here with us. I appreciate it's very informative, and I'm glad I got here. And secondly, I want to ask if you guys have any business card or contact information of yours. I'll be appreciated if I have it. And secondly, thirdly, is that you mentioned about the mentoring and sponsorship. I understand the need, but I'm not clear what the differentiality between each, because mentor is same, is assist you, guide you, and give you the feedback that you needed for your workforce or whatever. And a sponsor, I think, is doing the similar, but probably more legally. I'm not sure.
But we'll
So,
have one
yeah.
take that.
So a sponsor is not mentoring you, coaching, or counseling you. Your sponsor is somebody who's watching you perform, like Anna described, to the best of your potential. Your sponsor is seeing that you have great potential, and he or she is the person who's talking about you and selling you when you're not in the room. So that person, and a lot of times you don't even know a sponsor is doing this for you, but is the person who says, you know what, Cindy is awesome, and I've watched Cindy work, and I've seen what Cindy can do, and we need to move her to the next level. This person is not mentoring Cindy, this person is not sitting down with Cindy, helping her with her career plans or her objectives. This person may not even be having any conversation with Cindy, but is watching Cindy, and when it comes time for that next promotion, her sponsor is putting her name in the hat for the job.
Thank you so much. Excellent question. Yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Mark Dolan.
You probably need to stand.
Can't hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Cindy was trying to say was that women are more practical than men. So when she said, like, you guys make a calculated decision, because I'm married, so she's a lot more practical than I am. So she thinks things through more than I do. And for the panel, what are your thoughts on utilizing social media for mentoring? In terms of, connecting via social media, LinkedIn, find people at work, connect, send out, connect with them.
That's a good question. We have in LinkedIn, there's a professional women's network that's sponsored by Citi. We don't drive the content, it's just sponsored. And it's grown to about 150,000 regular users and 300,000 in total. And you don't have to pay, you just join. And what I've noticed there, because I do go in sometimes to comment as part of the Citi sponsorship, we're encouraged to go in if there's a subject that there's expertise around. And it's really thoughtful. People are making connections, and the woman who led that marketing initiative for us said that communities have formed where people do get together. And that was driven, LinkedIn hosts that. And so you'll get in different hubs, people will go and meet because they've met through these conversations online. I would not have imagined that. So I think it's a really great vehicle. My takeaway from that would be that if it's more content driven on something that you have real interest around, that it probably encourages you want to meet these individuals. So I thought that was a great example. To answer your question, I am on LinkedIn. If anyone wants to contact me about Citi, I would encourage you to do so. It's Duarte McCarthy. That's just very critical. It's not McCarthy. So if you have the bio, but I do encourage that, and that way I can put you in touch if there are some roles at Citi you might be interested in. So I think it's the new tomorrow. Look, 60% of your instruction here is online. That's a community. And so I think it's the way forward. I like to think of myself as not a dinosaur in this space. I was laughed at because I have a BlackBerry and an iPhone and an iPad. I'm trying to keep them all segmented, but I think it's really, thank you, Michelle. But it's very powerful. The opportunity, and my daughter has like thousands of friends on her. She's always connecting. So I think it's exciting, but specifically, I think it can foster networking with these communities where there's real shared interest on the topic. And that's just a neat example of that group, which is this professional women's network on LinkedIn, sponsored by Citi, that seems just really thoughtful conversation.
I'm a member of that group, so I can say
I'm
that
too,
it's
isn't
wonderful. Yeah, it's wonderful. So we have time for one more question.
I wanted to just answer your question. I think I'm actually a mentor on a site, actually it's an organization called Labo League. And Labo League is a professional organization for really Gen Y or millennial women in the workplace. And it's really to bring that group together. And mentoring is very important to our millennials. What I found though, and I've had to work with my own, I would say, conscious bias on what I think mentoring really is and what I've known it to be and how it plays out online. So Labo League, I actually get an email, it's linked to my email, and it notifies me that someone has a question for you. So what I've termed this is just-in-time mentoring, because the kinds of questions I'm getting is about negotiating an offer. I'm going in next week to talk to my manager, and I want to talk about I'm ready for the next level. And so I find that it's that type of feedback that they're looking for. So even though I started off, I probably get a question a week on Labo League, and I post that. And if it's not private, you can actually see my responses to people. And I try to be really thoughtful and give people resources. But then I'm also on Twitter. And what I find is it's very similar with Twitter, but I only have 140 characters that I can respond. If it is something that goes on longer, I will ask someone just to send me like an instant message, a direct message to me, and I can get back to you. But I have found that it tends to be the millennial women that really want feedback. They really want to know what is going on in the workplace. How does this really work? How do I get engaged? And they want more and more mentors. So I make sure that every week I put aside time and I go and check, okay, let me answer the questions. But to what Anna was talking about with Connect, the Citi Professional Women Network, it is awesome. And you actually get emails. Do you get the emails where if you miss something, you can get the emails of what's happened during the week, and there's really great feedback and information discussions going on. Last week I found out, how to become more fascinating at work.
And it's paid off here.
Paid off beautifully.
Okay, so we have time for one additional question. This young lady had her hand up in the back. So,
my name is Chandra. You mentioned about diversity and inclusion and your managers looking at the talent that they have. What do you do if the manager feels that the talent has given all that they can give? Like there's this attitude that I've seen all this talent has, and that's it, and I'm going to look elsewhere. And how do you sort of get that idea to change and sort of rejuvenate, get them back in the game so that particular talent?
Talent management is itself a discipline now at companies, and what you described could happen in particular areas where the growth isn't perceived to be there, or let's say there's a dramatic shift to digital, for example. So let's say suddenly it's a digital marketing area that needs to have staff, and you may have terrific talent, but they don't have those capabilities. So I think it's driven by market, by objectives, and there's a whole discipline that looks at the incumbents in an area and also looks at the skills necessary, who's in the pipeline, where are we going in 5 years, where's this market going. So that's a very thoughtful and important part of the company's practice. What our space gets involved in is who are you looking at as talented for those areas. So are you really looking across the bench? Are you looking across talent from different schools, from different cultures and backgrounds, or does that look very similar to what was there before? So that's enough opportunity for a diversity and inclusion focus around what does that mix look like. But I think that's a great question, because there's generally, that happens. And you hear about like the Y2K. And that was so hot. Y2K. So and now there's cybersecurity in our space is just the fastest growing area. And we were looking at the number of individuals who actually have the capabilities for those roles there aren't as many as the roles themselves. So it's interesting, and it happens. So what we do, at least in my space, is to ensure that there's equity around how we look at that talent.
I agree with that completely, and just to give you a real life example, I mean, I just reorganized a team. When I came in, I had to assess and reevaluate my team, and I noticed that we had the wrong people in the wrong jobs. I had a very diverse bench, and I didn't want to lose that talent. So we made, in conjunction with our HR team, great efforts to redeploy talent. So it was, okay, this is what we have now. This is what we need in the future. These people don't necessarily have those skill sets, but they have these other skill sets. How can we redeploy them so we don't lose the talent? And that's one of the really cool things that I like about Prudential. We've got people that they redeploy talent all the time, not only domestically, but around the world, to help us literally save top talented people who we don't want to lose from diverse backgrounds, who may just happen to have grown out of a job, or the job has grown out of the person, so that we can keep the talent, develop the talent in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing for you to know, because one of the key things, when you think about what makes a successful person in the workforce, is someone who's a lifelong learner. There will be jobs that will constantly change, and you have to have the ability to be adaptable and learn new skills. And that's actually one of the trends happening with the workforce globally, is roles are changing so quickly and so rapidly that if someone just kind of rests on their laurels and say, oh yeah, I got my bachelor's in mathematics back in 1951, but now you have all this things happening digitally, and Anna mentioned cybersecurity. Michelle and I were talking earlier about the influx of compliance careers because of the regulatory environment. You can change careers. You could literally say, I'm an actuary and now I'm going to go over here and do compliance, or I was in business and now I'm going to go into labor law. So the ability to come back and be in courses here and continue that skill building is going to be vital to your success in the future.
Well, that's going to have to be the last word. Please join me in